Before I now discuss the different varieties or different categories of spinal cord lesions, let me briefly discuss about the anatomy of the spinal cord. You see, if you cut spinal cord at different levels, the structures that you are going to see at various levels differ. If you cut the spinal cord at the level of the cervical region, structures that you are going to see are going to differ from those that you are going to see at the level of, let's say, lumbar region or sacral region. Even the size of the gray matter and the shape of the gray matter at different levels, either at the cervical region, thoracic region, or at the lumbar region, all these differ. You get it? So spinal cord, just like the brain itself, it has both the gray matter and the white matter. So the gray matter component of the spinal cord is located inside. The white matter component is located outside. That is the difference between the brain and the spinal cord. In the brain, you have the gray matter outside, and then you have the white matter inside. So the gray matter of the spinal cord is made up of figure H-shaped structure. So when you now cut the spinal cord at any part of it, either the cervical region, thoracic region, lumbar region, whatever region, that figure H shape is still maintained. But the only thing that is going to differ is the size of the holes. Because if you now look at the figure H shaped, you have what we call the posterior limb of the H, you have anterior limb of the H, and then you have the horizontal limb. Just like when you now draw a figure H like this, and then you have vertical arms, and then you have the horizontal arm like that. So this horizontal arm or limb, divide this vertical arm into two. You have posterior because it's a cross section. You look at it here, that is anterior, at the back is posterior. So now this is the posterior part, this is the anterior part. So you have posterior limb of this H, you have anterior limb of this H, which is this one here. That is anterior limb. This is the posterior limb, or you call it posterior horn or anterior horn anyway. So now the gray matter there is made up of this figure H structure, whereby you have posterior horn or posterior limb of the gray matter, and then you have the anterior horn or anterior limb of the gray matter. And then you have a horizontal limb linking the two limbs together. So within the substance of the horizontal limb, you have the central canal located that contains the CSF. So by having this figure H-shaped gray matter of the spinal cord, it divides the white matter into three columns. What we call posterior white column, lateral white column, and anterior white column. Are you clear? So the spinal cord from this figure H-shaped gray matter is divided into three columns. The white matter is divided into three columns: posterior column, lateral column, and anterior white column. The posterior horn of the spinal cord carries the sensory information to the cerebral hemisphere. So all these sensory informations from our own body, be it pain, temperature, vibration, sense, proprioception, two-point discrimination, whatever kind of sensation from our own different part of the body, they pass through the posterior horn of the spinal cord. Motor information coming from the cerebral cortex through the brainstem into the spinal cord, they pass through the anterior horn of the spinal cord. So that means anterior horn is to do with the motor function. Posterior horn is to do with the sensory function. Are you all clear? Good. So now, as I told you earlier, the white column is divided into three parts: dorsal column, lateral column, and anterior white column. In the posterior white column there you have all this sensation to do with proprioception and vibration senses, what we call conscious proprioception. For example, now we are just having this lecture. You have your phone by your side and somebody calls you, but because you put that handset into vibration, your handset is going to vibrate. You will feel vibration into your own body. That is what you call vibration sense. And that vibration sense is going to be carried through the posterior white column of the spinal cord. That is what we call dorsal column medial lemniscus pathway. So this sensation is being carried through this dorsal column medial lemniscus pathway, and then it ascends up into the spinal cord until it reaches the cerebral hemisphere. So all this sensation, something to do with body position. Like I know which position I am now. I'm in a standing position. You are all aware of which position you are in because you are in a sitting position. If you lean on something else, you know on which position you are. So your awareness of your own position in space, that sense is also been taken through this posterior white column. Similarly, the vibration of your handsets, when your handset rings in vibration, that vibration sense is also taken through this dorsal white column medial lemniscus pathway. Similarly, the fine touch, when somebody touches you on your own body and rubs your own body, all this fine touch is been taken through this white column or posterior column of the spinal cord. Similarly, 2-point discrimination sensation. When I now touch you with a compass, compass of a mathematical set, it has 2 points like that. So you place it, I ask you to close your eyes, and I ask you where and where did I touch you. You should be able to tell me that you touched me here and here. So that's what we call 2-point discrimination touch sensation. That one is also been taken through the posterior column of the spinal cord. So we have now seen the function of this posterior white column carrying this information or sensation consciously, conscious proprioception, vibration, and so on and so forth. On the lateral white column, it's something to do with our lateral corticospinal tract. Remember your anatomy very well. The lateral corticospinal tract, as you know, at the level of the medulla oblongata, as these pyramids are formed, left goes to the right, right goes to the left. They descend down through the spinal cord. And finally, as I told you before, or as you have learned before, almost 80 to 85% of these, fibers crisscross to the opposite side. These corticospinal fibers, they crisscross to the opposite side. So this lateral corticospinal tract is the decussated corticospinal tract. So now we know that we have the main bulk of the corticospinal tract in the white column of the spinal cord. Anteriorly, we also have the anterior corticospinal tract, which is the remaining 10 to 15% of the uncrossed fibers of the pyramidal tract. Are you clear? And as I told you before, the anterior horn of the spinal gray matter here is to do with the motor information as it descends from the corticospinal, from the cerebral cortex. This lateral corticospinal tract, the axons, they now come and synapse in the anterior consuls. So also from the anterior corticospinal tract, the fibers, as they descend, they now go into the anterior horn part of the gray matter of the spinal cord. And so they synapse with these neurons that are here. So the second neuron will now go outside to supply the muscles in our own body. Are you clear? So now you have your motor part of the spinal nerve. Here posteriorly, as you have your own sensation coming into the posterior hole. So the spinal nerve is the combination of both sensory and motor. So they now form a single spinal nerve. Are you clear? So now you are all aware that the spinal cord is being supplied by arteries, what we call anterior spinal artery anteriorly and posterior spinal arteries posteriorly. Anteriorly, you have a single spinal artery supplying the spinal cord coming from the vertebral artery. Remember your anatomy very well. Posteriorly, we have 2 spinal arteries also coming from the vertebral artery. So that is what we call anterior spinal artery syndrome. This anterior spinal artery syndrome is one of the lesions of the spinal cord. Once this artery is being occluded, this spinal artery, this anterior spinal artery supplies the anterior two-third of the spinal cord. So the anterior two-third of the spinal cord, everything here is being supplied by the anterior spinal artery. That means when you now take a cross-section of the spinal cord, you divide it into three parts. Anterior, 1/3, middle 1/3, and posterior 1/3. So the anterior 2/3, that means anterior 1/3 and the middle 1/3 constitute the anterior 2/3 of the spinal cord. So the anterior thirds of the spinal cord is being supplied by this anterior spinal artery. So once this anterior spinal artery is being occluded, all these structures here are going to be devoid of the blood supply. So that means there is bilateral involvement or loss of the motor function because the lateral corticospinal tract on either side are going to be affected. So there's a bilateral loss of motor function. If this takes place at the level of the cervical region, that means that's what we call quadriplegia. That means both upper and the lower limbs together, because it is bilateral, are going to be paralyzed. Are you clear? So there is a bilateral loss of, motor function of the upper motor neuron variety. You get it? Similarly, there is bilateral loss of pain and temperature. Remember, as soon as this sensation for pain and temperature comes inside the posterior horn, it crisscrosses to the opposite side. This one comes from the left, goes to the right. The one from the right comes and goes to the left. But because all these are affected, so there is bilateral loss of pain and temperature lost. Are you clear? Similarly, there is also bilateral loss of sensation. Sensation, what we mean by bilateral loss of unconscious proprioception, if you can remember, we have what we call dorsal and ventral spinocerebellar tracts. I'm sure you are aware of that. So we have our dorsal, we have our ventral spinocerebellar tract here. We have our dorsal spinocerebellar tract here. So this ventral and the dorsal spinocerebellar tracts, they are responsible for carrying unconscious proprioception. Remember, in this dorsal column, we're talking about the conscious proprioception. This one, the spinocerebellar tracts, both ventral and dorsal, are responsible for carrying this unconscious proprioception. Because it is bilateral, this side and this side are all affected because of this blockage of this artery. So you have bilateral loss of unconscious proprioception because of the involvement of this ventral and dorsal spinocerebellar tracts. Are you clear? But the dorsal column is intact. So that means the person will be able to sense vibration when somebody calls him. If he or she puts his handset in vibration and somebody calls you, even though you have this syndrome, but the person will be able to feel the vibration of the handset ringing. Are you clear? Similarly, the person will be able to know his position, his body position, whether standing position or sitting position, because the dorsal column is intact for the conscious proprioception. But for his unconscious one, that is going to be lost. Are you clear? That is what we call, anterior spinal artery syndrome. Are you clear? Which is virtually the same as anterior spinal cord syndrome, or anterior cord syndrome, or anterior part of the spinal cord syndrome. This is all the same. Causes blockage of this artery can result from high blood pressure, can result from diabetes mellitus, can result from clotting disorders, can also result from trauma, can also result from atherosclerosis that will block the artery itself. These are the common causes of the anterior spinal artery. Are you all clear? So that means this posterior spinal artery syndrome is only going to affect this posterior column. So with regard to the posterior column syndrome, these posterior spinal arteries are going to be blocked. What will block these two arteries together? Tumor. Tumor from the back can compress. Trauma can also, affect the two spinal arteries. Apart from that, this hypertension, diabetes can also block the two arteries. You get it? And also diseases that will affect, the disc, the intervertebral disc at the back, can also, like this herniation of the disc and what have you. All this can cause, compression of the spinal cord at the back, thereby compressing these two spinal arteries. And so all these parts, this dorsal column is going to be affected. So in that case, it's only the conscious perception that is going to be affected. That means body position sense is going to be lost, vibration sense is going to be lost, fine touch sensation is going to be lost, and also 2-point discrimination is also going to be lost by all other sensation like pain and temperature. Unconscious perception, motor functions are all going to be intact. Are you clear? That is the difference between anterior and posterior spinal cord, spinal artery lesions or syndromes, or anterior or posterior spinal cord lesions. Let me break here before I continue with other parts of the lesions of the spinal cord.